Thank you all for coming today. It seems like it's been a long time since we've been in here, but I want to say a special thank you to the Talbot County Free Library for offering us this space for our Date with History lecture series. And I'm thankful for each of you being here today. And we're grateful to have Jack Hanrahan, who is an author. And he came to the Society back in the fall with his new book about Frederick Douglass. And, you know, if you come in and have a book and it's about history, I'm going to rope you into a lecture, which is what I did. And so we're thankful to have he and his wife here today. The books are for sale in the back. And Jack currently lives in Charlottesville, but originally from Rhode Island. So I will let him finish the introduction about himself. Jack, thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Kayla, for inviting me. Thank you for the library for hosting this. As Peggy said, I'm from Rhode Island. Not too many people get out of Rhode Island, but I did. My career was in advertising. I'm not a historian. I'm not even a travel writer. I probably shouldn't even be here. But I hope you get something out of this talk. It'll last for about 35, 40 minutes. I'd love to hear your questions about Frederick Douglass or any topic that we cover. When I was a teenager in high school, there were a lot of activities going on in the civil rights era. And I lived so far away from it, I didn't have a driver's license. I was 14 years old in what would that be, 1963-ish? Can't do the math. Can you hear me okay in the back?
I think use the mic.
Okay, use the mic. Okay. Sorry. And I always wanted to go to the Civil Rights South. And thanks to that gorgeous lady in the back, we made a trip about 3 weeks to the civil rights sites because I felt something was missing in my life. I really didn't understand that era. I knew a bit about some of the heroes, but in the process of learning about that era, I learned about a lot more of the heroes. In doing that book, another void came up in my life. I didn't know about Frederick Douglass when I would write about Harriet Tubman in exploring Black historical sites around the country. I learned of the connection, of course, between Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Ida B. Wells. We're going to talk about Mississippi in a second. Memphis in a second. She's from Mississippi, Holly Springs, Mississippi. But she started her journalism career in Memphis. And in that context, I would hear about her and Frederick Douglass. And I didn't know enough about Frederick Douglass, and I filled that void by writing the book on Frederick Douglass in Maryland. The Civil Rights book, which I'm only going to take a second to talk about, covers the major destinations that you would expect a civil rights history book to cover. And it goes in a kind of a boot-shaped loop across 5 states in the South. But I didn't want to stop just with those 12 signature destinations. I wrote a chapter on each of the states in which those 12 locations are based and followed that up with a chapter on each of the states in the South, and then kept on writing, which is why this book turned out to be about 450 pages, to provide a way to connect with African American history across the entire country. So there's a chapter on all the states that are in yellow. Just to give you a quick flavor, when we go to Montgomery, you would expect the book to cover the heroes that we know, like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Reverend Abernathy, but it also talks about Joanne Richardson. She was a school teacher. She was a faculty member of the Alabama State University. So when Mrs. Parks gets arrested on December 5th, 1955, so we're in an anniversary year for that, she goes to the mimeograph machine. Anybody remember mimeograph machines? Okay, thank you. Now I know who my audience is like me. prints out flyer after flyer, 5,000 flyers, to let people know at church the next day that there's going to be a boycott of the bus system. And she's one of the heroes. You can see she got arrested for being a hero. But it's these lesser known, overlooked heroes of the movement that I try to bring out in the book. In Memphis, we all know the major event was the assassination of Dr. King. But the tour of Memphis, I suggest, should start where the two gentlemen, the sanitation workers who were killed when their garbage truck malfunctioned, crushing them inside. And you can see that that marker, which you can tell from the insignia on the top, was put in by the state of Tennessee. They talk about it as a tragic accident sparking the sanitation strike. It was tragic, but it was no accident because so many other trucks had malfunctioned. They should have been fixed and those two gentlemen should be there. So that's where that tour begins. But it covers something that I didn't know anything about in terms of violence against the black population of Memphis that was brought about in 1866. There was a lot of violence that occurred after the Civil War and through the Reconstruction period. And the book tries to make sure that people are aware of that part of this nation's history. And I mentioned Ida B. Wells in Memphis. So I hear about Frederick Douglass and how they fought lynchings in the late 1800s together. And the need for me to know more about Douglass occurred, and I tried to fill that void with another book. To do a good job with that book, I needed to do a lot of reading. I read Dr. Blight's book, professor from Yale, Pulitzer Prize winning book on the left side of this slide. I have my copy back there. When I referred to it this morning to check a fact out, it's falling apart. It's been used so much. It has more Post-it notes in there than the 3M factory does in Minnesota. I also read all three of Douglass's autobiographies, which are tough to read sometimes, not only because of the style of writing that existed, but the stories that he told. And we'll talk about some of those this afternoon. But you couldn't help but being struck by the courage that he exhibited from a young man, frankly, all the way till his death in the 1890s. How much pain he put his body through in the travel schedule that he took on when he became a lecturer for the abolitionists in the 1840s. And his persistence, he just, he was relentless in advising, or if you want to call it advising, Lincoln to get blacks into the fight in the Civil War. And when you read him, you might think, you're using the word patriotic in some of the things that he said about the country. He wanted the country to be what it pretended itself to be. So I consider him a very patriotic hero of the United States, and a hero in every sense. Very briefly, you probably all know that he was born and enslaved not far from here, and his daring escape to the north was aided by the cleverness of his wife, Anna Murray Douglass, who comes from the adjoining Caroline County here, a free black woman who he possibly met here, but definitely met in Fells Point area of Baltimore. He traveled extensively on the circuit for the abolitionists. I mean, you almost can't believe when you think of the nature of transportation options in that day, the conditions of roads, the times of year that he went. So when he was a relatively new person on the abolition circuit, he started one of those 100 convention tours in Boston in January, and then continues all around New England in January, February, and March. He wrote his first autobiography in 1845, which put him in danger of being recaptured, or being captured and put back into his enslaved condition. which caused his escape to the United Kingdom. He was a tireless advocate for his race. He worked with or talked with or lobbied 7 different presidents, and he died at age 77 in 1895. So that's a very brief look. In this book, Frederick Douglass in Maryland, I tried to do a few things. First, I wanted to tell his story. I wanted to be historically accurate, using his autobiography, the research that was done by Dixon Preston, a local journalist here in Talbot County, who wrote a book, Young Frederick Douglass, invaluable in writing the book that I've written, and the book by David Blight. So with all those resources, I feel the book is pretty accurate. My words are immaterial in the book. The magic sauce of this book is hearing Frederick Douglass or reading Frederick Douglass. So there's about 50 destinations in this book, and at each one there's a selection from either his autobiography or his oratory or his journalism, with 2 exceptions. I have wanted to have something in the book about Anna Murray Douglass, and I picked a selection from a book that their daughter wrote. Rosetta wrote about her mom. And then at a particular stop in Baltimore at the Bethel Church, I have a selection from Francis Watkins Harper, and it's a poignant poem about the enslaved condition, which I thought was perfect for that part. I cite the best scholars, and I honor the sites, and by honoring the sites, I mean if there's no marker at a site, or there used to be a marker at a site, I talk about the site. Because I think one of the outcomes that I talk about as a goal is to put markers at more places that connect to Douglass's life. And we'll start at one that thankfully now has a marker. In fact, my wife and I are going to head out to Tapper's Corner in between this lecture and the next one to get some photographs of that new marker. His likely birthplace, I think, is more that is said as his birthplace. He went back to the place in the late 1870s, recognized certain trees, he recognized the ravine that led down to the creek, and he saw it as the place that he lived with his grandmother, Betsy, who at the time was the mom of 12 people herself, 12 individuals. And she was a very clever individual, had a huge influence on Douglass. She was clever in fishing. She was clever in growing vegetables. She was very respected. She was a midwife. She earned money on her own as a midwife in the area. Again, a lot of that is covered in the book, as I think she deserved a lot of commentary at this point in the book. There is finally a historical marker there, so if you buy this edition of the book, it's going to tell you there isn't one, and I want to make sure that probably some in this room had a big deal to do with that marker going in place, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. He, as I said, came back there in 1878, and he affirmed that that lot on Tapper's Creek, Tapper's Corner, is where he was born. Down the road from there, there is a remnants of a mill. He talked about it as a playground for himself, as Levi Lee's Mill. And there was a mill there as early as 1804. It's not the one that's there now, I'm pretty sure, but Levi Lee owned a mill there in 1822. And Douglass would fish and play there. And he talked about it in a way that you can imagine a 4 or 5-year-old young boy going down there. And I'll read this part from his autobiography. Down in a little valley, not far from Grandmammy's cabin, stood Mr. Lee's mill, where the people came often in large numbers to get their corn ground. It was a watermill, and I never shall be able to tell the many things thought and felt while I sat on the bank and watched that mill and the turning of that ponderous wheel. The mill pond, too, had its charms, and with my pinhook and thread line, I could get nibbles if I could catch no fish. Soon after he writes that, he writes of a painful foreboding. Now, he's, of course, writing this in 1845, but he's thinking back. He knew something was going to happen. And what happens is his grandmother one day says, "We're going to go for a walk." And it turned out to be a 12-mile or so walk to the Lloyd plantation on the other side of the county. And you probably have been to the Lloyd plantation. You can't go on their property. They're very helpful in the archaeological research that has been done there. I believe people tell me they're very generous to many causes here in Talbot County. But he knew something was going to be changing. After the stop at the Lloyd plantation, the book continues on and goes to two historic African-American villages, Copperville and Unionville. At Copperville, which originally was called Liberty, there's a cemetery, not well cared for, to be honest about it, the Shield Cemetery. I did talk about it, put it in the book, and the reason I wanted to put it in the book because it's very close to the former Andrew Skinner farm, and Harriet Bailey, his grandmother, Harriet, was born on that piece of land. And Skinner's daughter eventually marries Aaron Anthony, who Douglas refers to as Old Master. There's some language in the book, most of it's Douglas's, that people may find offensive. But I made a vow that I wasn't going to edit Frederick Douglass. It's not my job. So if he talks about Anthony as Old Master, or he uses a word that we don't use anymore, but he uses it, it's in the book. So I just want to point that part out. In Unionville, which was originally called Cowgilltown, if you can believe it or not, and it was also established by former members of the United States Colored Troops. There's a beautiful church there, St. Stephen's AME Church, and a historical marker nearby, and it's the final resting place for 18 veterans. Thankfully, a cemetery that's much more cared for. Just to give you an idea of the Douglas Speaks excerpts, at Copperville, I include one that's really fitting for a village that was established by former members of the United States Colored Troops. It's Douglas speaking in 1862. He's speaking in Philadelphia. He's speaking at the National Hall, which is what you see on the screen. 1862, really early in the Civil War, 9 months after the attack on Fort Sumter, 6 months after the Battle of Bull Run did not go well for the Unions. And what Douglas wants is he wants Lincoln to put black soldiers in the fight. And he minces no words. He begins with a question, and he provides the answer as he typically did. And I think we may have, do we have a volunteer in the audience to read Douglas's words? Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate this. It gives me a chance to get some water.
Okay. You want to put that up?
Oh, sure. You can hold it, I guess.
Can you hear me? Okay. This is Frederick Douglass. It's a speech that he delivered at the National Hall in Philadelphia on January 14, 1862. It's called Fighting the Rebels with One Hand. How shall the rebellion be put down? I will tell you, but before I do so, you must allow me to say that the plan thus far pursued does not correspond with my humble notion of fitness. Thus far, it must be confessed, we have struck wide of the mark and very feebly withal. The temper of our steel has proved much better than the temper of our minds. While I do not charge, as some have done, that the government at Washington is conducting the war upon peace principles, it is very plain that the war is not being conducted on war principles. We are fighting the rebels with only one hand when we ought to be fighting them with both. We are recruiting our troops in the towns and villages of the North when we ought to be recruiting them on the plantations of the South. We are striking the guilty rebels with our soft white hand when we should be striking with the iron hand of the black man, which we keep chained behind us. We have been catching slaves instead of arming them. We have thus far repelled our natural friends to win the worthless and faithless friendship of our unnatural enemies. We have been endeavoring to heal over the rotten cancer of slavery instead of cutting out its death-dealing roots and fibers. We pay more attention to the advice of the half-rebel state of Kentucky than to any suggestion coming from the loyal North. We have shouldered all the burdens of slavery and given the slaveholders and traders all its benefits, and robbed our cause of half its dignity in the eyes of an onlooking world. I say here and now that if this nation is destroyed, if the government shall after all be broken to pieces and degraded in the eyes of the world, if the Union shall be shattered into fragments, it will neither be for the want of men, nor of money, nor even physical courage, for we have all these in abundance, but it will be solely owing to the want of moral courage and wise statesmanship in dealing with slavery, the cause and motive of the rebellion.
Let's give Jenny a round of applause, please.
You're welcome.
I love that litany at the end. If the nation is destroyed, if the government shall, after all, be broken into pieces, if the Union shall be shattered into fragments, it will be neither for the want of men or money, nor even courage, for we have all of these in abundance, but it's the lack of will, moral courage, as Douglas says. So he definitely was not a person afraid to speak truth to power, and eventually blacks entered the Civil War, and the war is won. So after covering a 2-day tour of the Eastern Shore, covering 30 locations, the book moves on, like Douglas did 3 times, to Baltimore. It starts at Smith's Wharf, where a business that was in place when Douglas got there in 1826, as an 8-year-old, Smith's Wharf, the Joseph Loan Company, and it makes sails. They are still in business. I think they still make sails. I connected with one of the ancestors who was kind enough to give me permission to use their old business card from that era. And he goes there because he's been at the Lloyd plantation, and they believe that he is someone who can take care of Hugh Ald's son. His name is Tommy. Thomas, this guy, I'm rolling the tape back a little bit. Thomas Auld, Hugh's brother, gets ownership of Douglas when Aaron Anthony dies without a will. In fact, the book on the Eastern Shore part of the book begins not at the Tapper's Corner. I begin it where probably one of the more frightful events in a enslaved person's life, where they're going up for auction or going up for family separation. In this case, it's family separation. The will is not in existence, and so they have to divide up all the enslaved people that Aaron Anthony owned. And Frederick, fortunately for him, gets to go back to Baltimore. But he sees his sister, oldest sister, shipped south, never sees her again. So anyway, he goes to Baltimore to take care of Thomas Auld, his new owner, to take care of Thomas's nephew, Tommy, son of Hugh Auld. I think I just covered this. Yes. He stays in Baltimore until 1833, until a dispute between the two brothers that has nothing to do with Frederick forces him out of Baltimore and to St. Michael's. Thomas Auld had shipped a cousin of Frederick's, Henny, who had severe injuries because of burns on her hand. And she couldn't do the kind of work that Thomas Auld wanted her to do. Sorry, Hugh Auld wanted her to do. And so Henny gets shipped back. And if the two brothers argue about this and say, well, if I have to take Henny here back on the Eastern Shore, I'm going to need Frederick. So Frederick goes back, now a teenager, or close to it, and he gets farmed out to two different farms, which I probably will talk a little bit about in a second. No, I won't, actually. I cut those slides out to be sure I make time. But he does get farmed out, first to the Covey farm, where he is beaten relentlessly every week until he fights back in a life-changing event, and the book takes you to the location of the Covey farm. He gets moved to the Freeland farm, a little bit further up the road. Since I'm not a native here, I can't tell you. I guess it's going back toward St. Michael's and away from the peninsula. The Timon Peninsula, that's how you say it? Timon? Tilton. Thank you. You guys say things so differently than they look. But thank you. Tilton Peninsula. Anyway, his attempt to leave Freeland Farm is thwarted, and he ends up in jail, not very far from where I'm speaking, in the Easton jail. And it's really until he comes back as a guest, his only time he talks about it in Easton. Anyway, after his attempt to leave with 5 of his friends, he ends up going back to Baltimore, where for him, it's an opportunity to learn a skill that becomes invaluable to him after his escape, and that is caulking. He is allowed eventually to keep part of his income until he kind of misses a deadline one Saturday, stays at a meeting with his friends, and doesn't pay Hugh Auld the $3 a week that he has arranged with Auld to pay him. And just because he's a day or two late, Auld says, that's it. So Frederick, 3 weeks out, begins to plan his escape and pulls it off in September of 1838. Baltimore, of course, when Frederick gets there, is really different than what he experienced on the Eastern Shore. It's a growing seaport, and it begins to connect with the rest of the world through roads and railroads. The railroads especially are particularly important to Frederick's escape, as you know. Fells Point is the center of that shipbuilding industry. So he's able to get work, even as he's an enslaved person, but he's able to find a variety of types of work that become important to him over time. He sees that there are a lot of free blacks. He learns about abolition during his Baltimore days. He becomes religiously awakened in those days. But there's a lot of slave trading goes on in his book, in his own book, and thus I captured it from my book. He talks about the kind of chains that he hears at night going from slave pens to the port where people are being shipped to the South. He also has a lot of interactions, a nice way to put it, between Irish and German immigrants that are working the ports. Some become his friends, some are very mean to him. In Baltimore, he becomes very aware of religion as a teenager. Hugh Alt's wife, who was religious herself, would bring her pastor home, and they would pray, and Douglas would hear those prayers. That is Frederick's Bible, by the way, on that slide. It's in the Washington home that he had. Again, thanks to the National Park Service for giving me permission to use it in the book. The streets of Baltimore, he learns to read, welcome, and he finds Bible pages on the ground. My wife asked me the other day, why would the Bible pages be on the ground? I don't know. I guess people's Bibles fell apart, but they were, Douglas tells the story about him drying those pages out and learning from the Bible. He also is influenced heavily by two black preachers. So when he comes back to the Eastern Shore, he's attending Sardis Chapel and trying to set up a Sabbath school. All of these things are talked about in the book. The two-day tour of Baltimore starts with doesn't have to start with, but it includes a walking tour of Fells Point, so it's a rainy day. Don't do the walking tour, do the driving tour first. But it takes you to his former residences with the Auld family. There were three. One of the major events in his life was buying a copy of the Columbian Orator at age 12 or 13. No one knows exactly for sure. The Knight's Bookstore is right on Fells Point. No marker there, but there should be. But it's talked about in the book. There are several former auction sites where human beings were sold off throughout the book, but there's one in particular in Fells Point. In Fells Point, there's a museum that bears Douglas's name, which is worth a stop in, and the restored home of the enslaved shipcockers that Ginny's relatives are part of, Courtney and her husband. And there's the locations from which he escaped and in the book. The driving tour of Baltimore includes locations where Douglas spoke. Battle Monument is one of them. Former cemetery, the Laurel Cemetery, where he spoke in honor of a bishop, Bishop Payne, shortly before his own death later in his life. But that cemetery has been turned into a strip mall. And there is an organization in Baltimore that raises money to raise awareness of the Laurel Cemetery. The current locations of two of the churches that he went to, so they're not in downtown Baltimore, they're in Baltimore, but further out, Bethel AME Church and the Sharp Street Church. Those are talked about in the book. Another former slave auction site, which is the color photograph on the bottom of this page, where two people were auctioned off in the 1830s. No one knows if Douglas knew these two people, but that site is memorialized with an amazing piece of public art. There's a jail site where runaways were kept when their owners were traveling through Baltimore, and there's three museums that are indicated. So as I get to wrap up, I haven't had enough of Douglas. So writing a book on Frederick Douglass in Maryland is it's like a passion. I want to keep writing about him. And as a New Englander, I wanted to write a book on Frederick Douglass in New England. He escapes, he goes through Rhode Island, he goes to Newport, and he is helped by two Quaker gentlemen, and they take him to New Bedford, to the house of Nathan and Polly Johnson. The house probably didn't look this good back in 1838, but that has been restored. Plaque out front. In New Bedford, an abolitionist, William Coffin, hears Douglas speak at a small church and says, maybe you should come to a meeting we're all going to have in Nantucket. And goes to Nantucket, speaks in the Athenaeum in Nantucket, and everybody, he doesn't say much the first night, but the second day of the 3-day meeting, he writes that he really couldn't hold it in. He had something he really wanted to say, and he talks about what his life was like. And the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society said, we've got to have this guy on the road. And they give him a 3-month trial. And of course, it becomes his passion for the rest of his life, being an orator. I think he spent more time in Boston than he did in Lynn. Lynn is the second place he moved to, probably for, again, the protection that Lynn might provide, the closeness to more railroad options. And Faneuil Hall, which is a lot better looking than that, is that picture, but that is a place that Douglas spoke at many, many times. He spoke at small churches. He spoke in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. He went all over New England. And my goal is to try to capture the places that are still there, get people to go to them and hear what Douglas had to say either at that place or close by. I'm working on the New York book sort of at the same time. When you research places, you will bump into spots that should be included. His most famous speech, arguably, is the one he did in Rochester at the Corinthian Hall, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. And everybody probably is familiar with that. It's a lengthy speech to listen to. It's often used around the 4th of July as a multiple person reading. And I do hope that is something that occurs in more communities as people become more familiar with this great man. He had an interesting relationship, a long relationship with John Brown, Harper's Ferry, and at the Hallett House in Rush, New York. That sign is outside there, and supposedly Raker Hallett tried to convince Frederick that you don't want to get too involved in that plot at Harper's Ferry. Garrett Smith Estate honors Mr. Smith, a very wealthy guy who financed, in no other way to put it, he financed Douglas's newspaper and was a very large benefactor to escaped enslaved people in his own area and established a community in the North Country. This is Douglas, not far from the Garrett Smith Estate in Casanova, where there was a huge meeting to plot against the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. Something that even as a free person, Douglas became free in the eyes of the law in 1846, thanks to some friends in Newcastle, England. And he, but you know, if you were free as a black person once the Fugitive Slave Law, you were not safe. You might be technically free, but you could be rounded up and brought back to the South. Anyway, I really should be wrapping up. I said about 40 minutes, and there we are. I want to thank the Historical Society again for inviting me. I want to thank the library for hosting it. This is the best crowd in terms of number of attendance, and I hope your questions can challenge me as well. I'm sure they will. But I really want to thank you for coming out on a beautiful day when you could be spending your time outside doing something else. I do have available books today. One book, if you want to buy the Douglas book alone, it's $25. No tax, just $25. If you have the exact amount, it's even better. We take checks, we take Venmo, we have a credit card reader when it works. They're also available at Vintage Books, thankfully to the folks over there for taking some copies. And of course, you can buy it on Amazon. This is not a money-making operation for me, so I'm just trying to cover a small part of the expenses of writing a book, so I can write the next one, and not that anything is going to deter me from that. So thank you again, and I'll welcome your questions. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious, through his travels, the way we travel today is difficult, but how did he get to so many places in his lifetime?
So, the development of railroads in the United States is key to the basics of that answer. You know, you could, from Boston especially, you could catch a train north into New Hampshire. You could catch trains out to the west, and as railroads kept developing, you could go further. I mean, the 100 Conventions tour of 1843, they went all the way to Indiana and Ohio. So railroads were key. Railroads got better. Although, I mean, he did things on horseback. He would end up having difficulty with someone who wouldn't take him in their stagecoach, and he would get a horse. He would rent a horse. You know, I mean, clever doesn't do the man justice. He's very resourceful. As a child, he was resourceful, and throughout his adult life. So that really is the key to his transportation. And you know, you have to say the commitment. You know, it's one thing that things like railroads and stagecoaches and horse rentals, I guess you'd call it, are there, but you've got to put yourself through a lot. I mean, there's a great story that he tells in his autobiography about a time where he's traveling in Lynn, and this is the second incident he's had with the same train conductor, and he is going to get thrown off that train. He's traveling with John Collins, who's his manager. He was a tough person to manage, so I give John Collins and anyone else who tried to control Frederick some credit, because he was his own person. Anyway, he gets thrown off the train. John Collins gets thrown off the train, and in the process, they grab the seats. Now, seats were not probably as bolted down as they might be today, and so in the first time he tells the story, one seat. But by the time he's in the 1880s with his last autobiography, 2 or 3 seats came with me when I was thrown off the train. You know, yeah. Yes, sir.
How extensive was his involvement with John Brown? And also, were there plots to remove him from the scene during his lifetime?
Remove Frederick from the scene?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so that's a really great two-parter. He and John Brown were friends. They meet in Springfield, Massachusetts, when John Brown lived there. John Brown stayed with the Douglases in Rochester. John Brown was another person who was all over the place. Just before the Harper's Ferry attack, Douglas and he meet in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, where there is a memorial marker to note the historic event that happened there. And at that, it's pretty, I'd say it's pretty safe to say that Douglas says, John, I'm not in this with you. I'm not going to be attacking a federal arsenal. And so, but John Brown goes on his way. When the attack occurs, the people close to John Brown, and they find some letters in somebody's dossier, day bag, I'll call it, and it mentions Douglas. So the governor of Virginia, this kind of goes back to the story that they wanted me to tell in Hampton, Virginia. The governor of Virginia has an arrest warrant for Douglas. Douglas, at this point, is on the East Coast. He's in New York City. And the word reaches him that they're after you. And thankfully, a telegraph operator in Philadelphia tells the abolitionists, and they get Douglas back to Rochester, and up to Canada. And so he escapes through Canada and goes to England for the second time. Not as well planned, probably, a visit as the first one was. Did I get to both parts of your question?
Plots to remove him from the scene.
Yeah, there was a warrant, so the abolitionist community.
Well, I mean, from the standpoint of plots to assassinate him because of his ability.
No, I don't.
I'm surprised that there was not more.
Yeah, I don't know of a plot to assassinate him. I mean, if who knows what would have happened if somebody caught him, but you know, that's a fact that I'd like to know as well, but I don't know that there was a specific plot to assassinate him because of the John Brown connection. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think after the war, when he was touring the country, he was going into the South in some of the most dangerous areas. So he was, I think, always at risk.
He was always at risk, even I would say, even outside the South at certain times. But you're right. So he was given the job. He took on the job. I don't think he was well properly paid for the job of recruiting blacks into the armed forces. And so, yes, he did not shy from dangerous work. And like I would agree with what you said, that he was probably always at risk when he was doing that particular work. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I mean, my understanding is that he had interactions with Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, yes.
During the war. And I'm just wondering if you found out anything in particular about possibly his influence on the Emancipation Proclamation.
His influence would have been his impatience for it to happen and his excitement that the evening that it happened, or over New Year's night and into the New Year's Day, New Year's Eve night, I should have said. He has a big crowd in Boston ready for the big announcement, and when it comes, it's just a giant celebration and party. Yes, he met with Lincoln to advocate for black soldiers. He was shunned from the White House at one point after Lincoln must have told him to come after his inauguration, second inauguration, and he was welcomed into the White House with Lincoln saying words like, my friend Douglas, and in breaking the barrier that Frederick probably clearly faced when others didn't want him to get near the president. Yeah, a neat question. Yes, ma'am.
He was married young, and they purchased a house. And she, I think, always remained in that house. But he did send her money to raise the children, I think.
Oh, yes.
Was it mentioned very much? Because he died before she did, or?
No. He eventually marries again.
That's what I thought.
So, it's interesting. He rarely uses the words Anna in his books. Very, very rarely. I don't know why. I mean,
It's really weird. It's sort of left blank.
Well, he had to be very appreciative of the role that she played, one, in his escape, two, taking care of those children. I mean, so when he goes to Lynn, and she has her third child while they're in Lynn, but she goes to New Bedford to have the baby. There's got to be a story there. Maybe she knew a friend who was a good midwife or something. But they come back, and shortly after the birth of his namesake, right? Or is it Charles Redmond? I get the name of the order of the children mixed up. He goes to London, goes to England, travels around the UK, and he's feeling he's not getting treated properly by the abolition. He's got to be worried about his wife, and so but he did. He was in my opinion, a generous person with his relatives till the day he died. In fact, some people say.
An interesting story all by itself.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yes, ma'am.
But there is a lady by the name of Celeste Marie Benier. She's been here in Talbot several times before at the request of the Frederick Society. And she is now, she has a book, written 4 or 5 books, one for each child, and for Anna Maria Douglas. They'll be coming out, and they will be coming out. The books will be coming out in 26.
Yeah, I'm also told that there's a book on Anna Maria Douglas written by a professor out on the West Coast, published by Yale Press.
David what?
It's in the book.
John Stauffer?
Huh? No, it's by, oh my gosh. Listen, if you can, where would it be? It would be in where the picture of Anna Maria Douglas is at stop 6 on the Eastern Shore, if I remember right.
And I would like to know, and I'm glad you mentioned what this latest 4th of July, because we sponsor that every year here
Yeah.
in this county.
That's
It's
one.
a great event. Yeah, great. Yeah, we usually have about 55 people
Are
speaking.
you all with Direct Church?
No, we're with Frederick Douglas Honor Society.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in my October trip, I met with Ms. Brooks.
Shelby.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. She's a big fan, lovely lady. How about this side? Anybody? Not to keep you all, exclude you all. Okay. Oh, yes.
Are there any recordings of him as an orator? I know the timing is a little tight.
I've never heard one. No, there's a lot of
He just
people.
missed it. He just missed it.
Yeah.
Most photographed.
Oh, yes, definitely. In fact, you mentioned John Stauffer. John Stauffer has a book of all the photographs. If you need a very large book for any reason, that's the one. It's just gigantic. Yeah, but there's a lot of people who will impersonate, if that's the right word, or channel Douglas. So what Ginny did with that reading, I thought I would do that at an event at Peterborough a couple of years ago when I hadn't written this book. And the gentleman who did the reading, and get ready for this now, Ginny, he has a career now of touring as Frederick Douglass. So there we go. You've been really great and a gracious audience. Thank you very much for coming and your attendance and your questions. I'm really grateful. Thanks again.
They had David White, John Stauffer.
Hi, sir.